Right, Algebra 1. Today we are going to look at Chapter 3.3 for Apex, Semester 2, solving quadratics using the quadratic formula. So yes, we skipped 3.2, so we are on 3.3. So the quadratic formula is another way to solve for quadratics. So far, you guys have learned how to solve by factoring and by solving using square roots. So today we're going to talk about the quadratic formula. The important thing to know is that this is only for solving quadratics. So only when it's in the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are numbers. Okay. So a cannot equal 0. Okay. And we can use this formula. So you guys need to memorize this formula, and you are going to use it for the rest of your math lives. So it's really important that you know it. And you need to know that when you plug these A, B, and C values in, there are no variables. It is only a number. Okay. So A, B, and C are numbers, okay, not variables. So when we solve for these X values, keep in mind also that you're going to hear them called different things. So you're going to hear them called solutions, zeros, roots, X intercepts. Okay. But all that means is that you're solving for the X value. So in a parabola or a quadratic, you're solving for where this graph actually touches the X axis. So some important things to remember: there can be no term whose degree is higher than a squared or a 2. The coefficient of x squared term cannot be 0, and the right-hand side, well, it says the right-hand side, either side must equal 0. Okay, so the equation must equal 0. So let's take a look at some problems. The first thing I always do is make sure that it's set equal to 0. So here, notice the left side is equal to 0, but that's okay. One of the sides equals 0. So then I have an ax squared plus bx plus c. So now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write my a, b, and c values, and keep in mind that the signs go with those. So my a is a positive 5, my b is a positive 4, but my c is a negative 3. So now I can plug those into my formula. So I'm going to do negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times my a value times my c value, all over 2 times that a value. So when we are working these, we want to start by doing the inside of the radical. So I'm going to rewrite the rest of it, and I'm going to go ahead and start working the inside of the radical. Okay, so 2 times 5 is 10. Yeah, you can go on ahead and do that too. All right, so 4 squared, 4 times 4 is 16, minus 4 times 5 is 20, times negative 3 is negative 60. Okay, pay close attention to those signs, okay? So that negative sign is right there, but then when you multiply these three numbers, you get a negative number. Okay? So that makes this a plus 60. So now I have negative 4 plus or minus 76, square root of 76, all over 10. Okay, we need to see if 76 if we can reduce this. Okay, so 76, I'm going to see what I can multiply to get 76. Well, I tried on my calculator dividing by 4, and I got 19. Okay, so now I'm going to rewrite this as the square root of 4 times the square root of 19. Well, I can take the square root of 4, and it's 2. So simplified, it's going to be 2 square roots of 19. Okay, so negative 4 plus or minus 2 square roots of 19 all over 10. Okay, but now I have one more thing I need to check when I'm simplifying. Okay, is there a greatest common multiple between those 3? Yes, there is. It's 2. So I'm going to divide every one of these by 2. So I wind up with negative 2 plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1. So that's just 1 square root of 19, or just 1, all over 5. Okay, you guys need to work on getting proficient at simplifying like that. Because especially once you get into geometry, we don't accept it not simplified. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next problem. So 9x squared plus 6x plus 1 equals 0. So it's in the right format. Okay, so now I'm going to write my A is 9, my B is 6, and my C is 1. So I'm going to now plug it into my formula. So negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times A. Okay, so I'm just going to start working this problem now. So I'm going to have negative 6 plus or minus. I'm going to work, remember, the inside first. The square root of 36 minus 4 times 9 is 36 all over 18. Okay, I'm going to keep going. So I have negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 36 is 0 all over 18. Well, what is the square root of 0? That's 0. So that's going to be negative 6 plus 0 over 18 and negative 6 minus 0 over 18. Okay. So this one I didn't break apart because there was nothing I could do with that square root of 19. But because this comes out as a number outside the radical, it's a perfect square in other words, I can actually break this apart. Now this one's a 0, so it's not going to make any difference. But if it's, if this is the square root of 4, then you would have to do plus 2 minus 2. So you really got to keep that in mind when you're doing these problems. Okay, so either way here, I'm going to get the same thing because those zeros are going to go away. So negative 6 over 18, I'm going to simplify that, and I get negative 1 over 3. Okay, so that is my value for x. Okay, because remember, in our equation here, we're solving for x. Okay, so notice here there were two answers. Okay, there was negative 2 plus square root of 19 divided by 5, and negative 2 minus the square root of 19 divided by 5. Okay, so we had both that plus and minus sign. That means there were two answers. Here, yes, we had the plus and minus sign, but then when we did the square root of 0, it was just 0. So we came out with only one answer. Okay, and let's see what happens on this last one. So I'm looking at the same thing. So I have my ax squared plus bx plus c. A is 1, b is 2, c is 7. So I'm going to do negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. All right, so now I'm going to start working it. So negative 2 plus or minus 2. Oh, for some reason I wrote 2 to the 4th. It should be 2 squared. I was thinking 2 squared is 4. All right, so 4 minus, there's my minus right there. 4 times 1 is 4, times 7 is 28, all over 2 times 1, which is 2. Okay, I'm still working the inside. So negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 24 all over 2. All right, so here there's an issue. Okay, so right now you guys don't know anything about how to take the square root of a negative number. Okay? That becomes an imaginary number. Okay? So what that means is when you're looking at a graph, okay, imaginary numbers are actually coming up off the page at you. So you guys aren't dealing with that right now. So this actually could be touching in other places because as it comes off the page, it moves, okay? So it could be touching, in other words, this x-axis, right? If this x-axis were three-dimensional and coming off the page and the shape was also three-dimensional and coming off the page, it could touch this x-axis somewhere out here. Okay, so that's called an imaginary number. So if you get a negative under here, you're going to put no solution or no real solution, okay? Because there is a solution. It's just an imaginary number, okay? So you can put no solution, okay? But really it's no real solution, okay? So make sure that you have no real somewhere in there. And that's going to lead us into our next discussion in just a minute. Okay? So I'm going to go on ahead now and we're going to do one more problem. So this one right here, we're going to use quadratic formula to solve. You'll notice there's a 2 over there. Well, remember I have to have it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. So now I'm going to get 2x squared plus 3x plus 3 equals 0. Now I can go on ahead and use my quadratic formula. So my a is 2, my b is 3, and my c is 3. So I'm going to do -3 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So I'm going to work the inside first. So I'm going to have -3 plus or minus the square root of 9 minus 4 times 2 is 8 times 3 is 4 times 2 is 8 times 3 is 24. 8 all over 4. Okay, I'm still working the inside. So I have -3 plus or minus the square root of 9 minus 24, which is -15, all over 4. Okay, so this one right here, I have a negative under here, so I'm going to put no real solution. Okay, so that's my little solution symbol, or you could just write solution. Okay, all right, so there's no real solution because it's a negative under the radical. Okay. So under the radical is what's called a discriminant. Sorry, I got to get my camera adjusted. So under the radical is what's called a discriminant. Okay? So the discriminant is that b squared minus 4ac in your quadratic formula that's under that radical. So this tells us how many answers there are, how many real solutions there are. Okay? So if b squared minus 4ac is positive, okay, so remember we have -b plus or minus the square root of your discriminant. So this is your discriminant. If my discriminant was a 4, okay, so I'm just going to write a problem out here. So say I've done this quadratic equation and now I've solved this thing, okay, and I've gotten to here. Well, the square root of 4 is 2. So that would really be -2 plus or minus 2 over 2. But because of that plus or minus, I would have to break that into a -2 plus 2 over 2 and a -2 minus 2 over 2. Okay, so if the number under the radical is a positive number, you have 2 real solutions. In other words, it's going to touch the x-axis in 2 places. If it's 0, okay, if it equals 0, okay, well, the square root of 0 is just 0. So if we're adding 0 or subtracting 0, it doesn't make a difference. Okay? So that means that there's only going to be one answer. So same thing here. So just like on the other page when we did, so if we have -2 plus 0 over 2 and -2 minus 0 over 2, that's going to be just -2 over 2 or -1, no matter what. Okay? And then the last one that we talked about was if that discriminant, the number under the radical, is less than 0, so a negative number, okay, there's no real solution. So like I said, 3 dimensions, okay, this plane, this x-axis is actually coming off your page, and so is this parabola. Okay? So this parabola might actually touch somewhere out here, but it's not anywhere we're seeing it. So we call it an imaginary number. Okay? But we say there's no real solutions. Okay, so let's go on ahead and take a look at these problems. Okay? So it says determine the number of real solutions. Right, so determine the number of real solutions. So here we're going to go x squared minus 6x, and I have to add 7 to both sides to get it equal to 0. Now, I'm not going to do the entire quadratic formula. I'm just going to do the part that's under the radical. So I'm going to do my 6 squared, my b squared, minus 4 times my a times my c. So that's going to be 36 minus 4 times 7, which is 28. Okay. So that gives me a positive number. Okay? I don't care what the number is. Okay, so that gives me 2 real solutions. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing here. So I have x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 0. Okay, I'm going to plug that in. So 6 squared, okay, negative 6 squared. Make sure that you put that negative, same here. Okay, inside the parentheses, especially if you're doing this on your calculator, because otherwise you're going to have problems. So -6 squared. Minus 4 times 1 times 9. Okay, so that's going to be 36 minus 36. So that's going to be the square root of 0. So there's going to be 1 real solution. And this last one, x squared minus 6x plus 11 equals 0. So under the radical, it's going to be negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 11. So that's going to be 36 minus 44. Okay, that's going to be a negative number, so that's going to be no real solutions. Okay. All right, so make sure that you do your quizzes or your homework for this and ask for help if you need it. Do not forget quadratic formula. You're going to need it for the rest of your math lives. Have a great day.